on our virtual format today, we felt like as things were moving along and looking downstream, that we really wanted our nonprofits to think, at least consider, some strategic partnerships. And so we are excited to be partnered with Von Lehman today to help us through this discussion. And we have some great panelists with us. You know, I love our nonprofit community because they're always willing to share their own experiences. So we have three great panelists here who will be introducing themselves momentarily. And with us today from Von Lehman is Stephanie Allgeyer, who will be leading and moderating the conversation. And if you have any questions, well, Katie's put it in the chat, but if you have any questions, send her a question that you might have of the panelists. So thank you all for being here. Look forward to learning more from these three great panelists and Stephanie. And Stephanie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. Like Jenny mentioned, my name is Stephanie Allgeyer. I'm a shareholder with Von Lehman and Company that oversees our nonprofit services group. And we are thrilled to be able to participate along with Leadership Council. Happy to serve as the moderator and looking forward to our conversation today. Should be a good one. As you know, strategic partnerships, they've been a hot topic for a few years now, but based on everything that's obviously, you know, what we like to say this day and age, that's a very common thing to say. And it's something that a lot of organizations are looking more into. There appears to be less funding, more types of organizations, less people. And so really it's the idea of good people coming together, good organizations coming together to do great things together. So we've got some awesome panelists, and you know, this is kind of the first of a three-part type series on strategic partnerships. But what we have this time is we have three organizations that have gone through different levels of strategic partnerships, whether that be full mergers or joint ventures or just organizations that came together to facilitate their missions at the same time or to present a need. So what we want to do, you know, hopefully in the future is avoid duplication of efforts and duplication of resources and duplication of folks. So we're going to learn a lot about today about how they went through each of their specific strategic planning, or I'm sorry, strategic partnership, and get an idea of maybe, you know, some of the successes and how they determined about how they were going to do their strategic partnership, but also today, we're going to talk about some of the hard topics as well, some difficulties that they had and some of those topics too. So we're going to touch both factors. But as Jenny mentioned, if you do have any questions, please use the chat feature and those will be submitted over and we'll try to get every single one of them. But to start us off, I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves and give us a couple minutes in regards to what their specific strategic partnership was. So Andy, let's start off with you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks a lot. My name is Andy Hutzel. I work with Over the Rhine Community Housing. So I've got a long history in kind of the nonprofits. I've been doing this about 26 years with a mix of homeless services and affordable housing development and management, and then just kind of overall community development work. So right now I'm the Director of Resident Services at Over the Rhine Community Housing. We've been a neighborhood-based organization for close to 40 years, but we are at this point in our history kind of branching out into other neighborhoods. So there is kind of the one major partnership I want to talk about, but just wanted to highlight a couple other examples of kind of partnerships we have going. There's a lot of folks on the call and there's probably a lot of great partnerships. So hopefully I'll learn some things from you as well. It's utilizing your strengths, right? So our organization has kind of fine-tuned its strength to be an affordable housing developer, which is a really complicated thing to do. But we partnered with Tender Mercies a few years ago, and we utilized our strength in terms of development and financing. And Tender Mercies utilize their strength as far as operating and providing services to homeless with mental illness. So we partnered on a project called 821 Flats. It was 57 units, development in the West End, and that just opened up a few months ago, and that was just a really great partnership from top to bottom. Another one, which is a little bit longer, a program called Paths to Recovery. We partnered with Greater Cincinnati Behavioral Health Services, probably about 10 years ago, to create a site-based permanent supportive housing project called the Jimmy Heath House, and to serve 25 of the longest term kind of homeless individuals in our community. In addition, we also have about 80 scattered site certificates to house people off the streets. So it was kind of the first of its kind in Cincinnati. We did a lot of kind of looking around the country about who was doing this type of housing. But GCB and us came together, along with, there was a couple other partners too. And I think the overall effect in 10 years is that I think this project had a lot to do with reducing the number of chronic homelessness, the number of chronic homeless in our community. And the partnership's still going strong. We got multi-million-dollar federal grants to kind of help provide services. We built the housing, we're managing the housing. Just a great partnership as well. During the pandemic, we're all trying to figure out, new partnerships in a way, but I feel like it's really relying on those existing partnerships and really strengthening and leaning heavily into some of those existing partnerships. So we have a partnership with the Cincinnati Health Network who does, has the mobile health van. They have physicians and nurses. So they've really stepped up a lot in terms of helping us out on our site-based permanent supportive housing project serving the homeless. And that has been just a great partnership that, again, existed, but boy, it's really been extended and strengthened as well. And I have to say, one of the unfortunate pieces kind of the pandemic on our side in terms of property management, we've definitely seen an uptick in domestic violence over the last 5 months. And so it's, again, leaning on those partnerships we've had with numerous partners who are involved in serving those who are victims of domestic violence. And so we've certainly reached out to them more intensively in the last few months, and that has really benefited our residents. Lastly, just a partnership that I just really encourage all organizations. So we've been in the neighborhood for a long time, and a lot of nonprofits really don't get involved in their community or neighborhood councils. And I just have to say, like, that is such a huge thing if more of us can get involved in the neighborhood councils in which we're located. So we've been involved in the Over the Rhine Community Council for a long time and continue to do so, and really encourage our staff to get involved and participate in that council. But I think the reason I was really brought into this conversation was to talk about probably our most significant partnership. And that was, I helped kind of lead a merger with two small nonprofits. So I was the executive director of a nonprofit back in 2003 and 4. And maybe there's people on the call who are just part of these small nonprofits where you might have 3, 4, 5, or 6 staff and maybe a $400,000 annual budget. So I was one of those people back then. And just after really talking with residents and board members and staff members and then constituents and city council folk, it just became clear that there wasn't really a path forward for just that small organization to make the impact that really needed to be made for our residents. So I, again, talking with the various constituents and other partners who were doing community development at the time, we decided after a lengthy of several months and hiring a local organizational development expert to kind of help us walk through what type of alliances existed and so it wasn't just merger that we started with, but it was merger that we ended up with at the end. So it was a 2-year process, very extensive, as you can imagine, just merging two organizations. So there were just countless meetings, and we hired some wonderful consultants out of Baltimore, Maryland, who are just really well known around the country in community development. And so the result was, again, we had a staff of 6 and a little less than a $500,000 budget, and today it's a long way since then, but we have about 45 staff and close to a $5 million operating budget. And we've pretty much doubled everything in terms of housing inventory, the number of people served, and really improved our skill sets in terms of affordable housing development and management and providing services. So it's been a big win, certainly for us, but mostly for our residents and our neighborhood. So I just feel like we've been able to kind of meet the needs of our residents, and we really have resources now to we always talk about what are the best practices in our respective industries. And I think, you need to have the resources to implement, to learn and implement those best practices. So I think the merger really allowed us to get access to the resources we needed to do the best job that we could do. So the mission hasn't changed really in 14 years. It's probably just deepened and been strengthened. So it was a really great process, and I can talk more about that after the others get into what they'd like to share as well. So is that okay?
Yeah, but great, Andy. Thanks. Yeah, very descriptive, and obviously points to that throughout the history of the organization that you've had multiple types of ventures and partnerships that you've identified. So, Roger, a couple minutes.
Sure. Roger Babik with Master Provisions. I have the privilege the last 26 years to both found and lead our efforts to serve God by connecting resources to needs. Megan Jackson, our development director, is on here, and she's brought a great breath of fresh air to our organization in dealing with the public. But partnerships has been part of our DNA since the very beginning. And we look, as a Christian organization especially, is how can we strengthen that other group? Our primary focus is an other-centeredness. And I'll be talking today about Boon County Schools and how we were able to partner with them. As a fairly small nonprofit, we have 10 full-time workers, and we had 6,500 volunteers last year that drive what we do. Our operating budget's $1.8 million, but we look in terms of partnership of how can we use our people and our assets. Our assets could be infrastructure, building, it could be cold storage, it could be transportation. But those two general categories, how can we use what we have to help grow and expand a partner's mission? So with Boon County Schools, one of the holes that they had was specialized training for their special needs students. So Randy Poe, when he was the superintendent, brought a whole group of people from central office over in 2014. We set up learning stations at Master Provisions to show them some of the different aspects of what we could teach special needs students in the areas of life skills training. That day that they spent over here turned into a pilot program at Ryle High School, where Boone County Schools would bus a group of special needs students, 6 to 8 at a time, to Master Provisions. We would teach them to follow instructions, be part of a group, to sort, inventory, package, recycle, so that we could develop life skills in them that could become transferable to help them get a job when they left high school. So that partnership has grown, and obviously COVID-19 shut that down temporarily. So we hope sometime in the school year to get back to that. But the partnership with Boone County Schools then was also duplicable. So we've been able to expand that over into Campbell County Schools and Erlanger Lloyd Schools, where we welcome special needs students. We believe that has a positive, long-lasting impact in our community to help special needs students gain valuable life skills. So I'll focus a lot on that partnership today, as well as what we've done with Go Pantry. But I don't want to say any more introductory-wise, so that Mary can talk, and then we can get into some of the questions and perhaps even questions that you have about strategic partnerships.
Thanks, Roger. Mary?
Hi, yes, my name is Mary Delaney. I'm the Executive Director of Community Matters and Education Matters. And I'm going to start off by apologizing for Cincinnati allergies on behalf of all of us, because they have got me today. So I apologize if I cough into the microphone. I do not have COVID-19. It is Cincinnati allergies, I promise. So I am excited to be part of this today, and I have a primary partnership that I will kind of reference, and that is the fact that my introduction includes being executive director of 2 nonprofits. So we have sort of a unique organization structure where we have 2 sister nonprofits with some shared staff and a shared executive director. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of that relationship and how we got there and where we're headed in the future. And then I also want to talk a little bit about some of our other strategic partnerships. We are a place-based organization, so it's really critical for us to tap into partners that have expertise in certain areas that would benefit our community. So for example, we have a really growing strategic partnership with Over the Rhine Community Housing that I'll reference, and with Santa Maria. And then we're also in the process of acquiring another small organization that, and I'll talk about that as well. So my expertise is really in how does the small nonprofit create those partnerships to bring the right resources and ideas into the neighborhood.
Great, thanks, Mary. So obviously, as we talked about earlier, a lot of great organizations that all, three have different experiences in terms of strategic partnerships. So one of the things that was extremely common in everything that you commented on, all three of you, was expertise and strengths. And so sometimes it's difficult to identify and really come to terms with the fact that you may not have those expertise and strengths in your specific organization, or maybe the organization that came to you. But I'm just curious to know if you had an existing relationship with the organization that you may have partnered with, and possibly coupled along with how long did it really take you to determine that there was a need to go outside of your own organization. Roger, do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. With Boone County Schools, we started getting help from students when we were an international only mission back in mid 2000s. I remember one time we had students from Beechwood High School, Newport High School, and Ryle High School in a competition to see who could load 3 containers of clothing most quickly. So we were already partnered with Boone County Schools through, a lot of times it was through athletic teams that would come and serve and volunteer, and then also National Honor Society students. We've always wanted to open our doors to provide service learning opportunities for students, whether they're public or private school students. And so that set the tone. The good job that we did in volunteerism piqued Randy Poe's interest of how we could help develop special needs life skill training within their special needs student community.
Mary, how about there?
Yeah, so for our primary partnership between Education Matters and Community Matters, sort of a unique history in that we kind of went the opposite way that a lot of nonprofits go. We were both kind of part of one organization and we broke into two. And then we had separate leadership for a while and then made the decision to kind of unite it under one leader. So lots of learnings there. Lots of things I would not recommend doing. But what is unique is that it allowed us on the Community Matters side to develop a culture that we would not have been able to develop under the one organization. So we developed this culture of risk-taking and kind of having nothing to lose since it was a newer organization. And so in that sense, having these roots in something, but being able to take the risks allowed for something that we didn't really anticipate. In a lot of our other partnerships, we had been working side by side with other organizations, like Santa Maria, for example, for many years. And we just sort of got together and said, let's make this more intentional. And that's kind of where things started.
I like the idea of the concept of let's make this more intentional. I think that's a good idea to get in a lot of people's mind. And when we talk about intentionality, especially when you're merging in possibly or becoming one organization, the merging of two, the difficulty also with that intention is dealing with your board and also your staff as well. So sometimes when you are merging organizations or bringing another organization in, there's a lot of uncertainty is how does that affect me? How does that affect our organization? What's going to happen to the staff? And so maybe if you could spend a couple minutes, each of you, talking a little bit about how you were able to successfully, or maybe some challenges as well, regarding your staffing in your board and getting everybody on board and really making sure that they were communicated to. So, Andy, you had a full-blown merger to complete Over the Rhine Community Housing. So let's start off with you.
Yeah, definitely. So it was really being intentionally meticulous as far as getting the staff together. I think everybody was kind of on edge for a bit there in terms of hearing about the merger was the way we were going to go. So we were really intentional. There was, that we were on our staff were long-term neighborhood tenants, residents, and it was important that we retain them. We retain everybody with all that knowledge and history in the neighborhood. So like I say, it was about a 2-year process of just countless meetings with board, with staff, with a mix of board and staff. With a merger, we created a merger steering committee, which met, every couple weeks. So that was definitely one of the top, one of our priorities was, we want staff retention was really important to us. We knew that maybe some rules were going to change. People may not be doing the same things they were doing, but at that point, it was one of our highest priorities. So we made sure that happened.
Great, Roger.
As far as our DNA since the beginning was how we can strengthen partnerships. So we're based on partnerships. So at the committee level, an operations committee would review any new partnerships and essentially just look at what's the capital cost human-wise in volunteers or staff, can we handle those, and what's the cost of that partnership. But there's a great openness within our board and committees to bringing on new partners, and there's not very little objection within our corporate culture of having expanded partnerships. So taking on Boone County Schools was a natural progression from a small partnership at the NHS level or maybe athletic team level and taking it to a focused partnership to develop special needs students through a formal life skills training program. So I think we have great acceptance. And when people are on our board and committees, they understand that we're partnership driven and we're going to look how to strengthen our partnerships or take on new partnerships that we have the human capacity to provide and strengthen.
Great, thanks. Gary?
Yeah, so I think on our end, one of the critical pieces is getting staff on board with new partnerships. And what we notice often happens is that the staff who are actually going to be the front line of the partnership are not included in the strategic discussions about the partnership. And so it feels sort of like this partnership is handed down to them and they're not fully on board because it's really hard. It's challenging when you really hit the ground with how to collaborate directly on a program together. And so one of the things that we've done is include staff in the higher level strategy discussions, because if those decisions are kind of just held at the board level and the staff aren't engaged, we've seen the partnerships kind of fizzle in action. So that's one piece that we've really learned along the way.
Okay, great. So obviously a big concept is the engagement and the buy-in. And then, going forward, people are a lot more, interested and excited about those types of partnerships. I'm interested to see how many of you actually use consultants, outside consultants, rather than kind of go about all of this on your own. Mary, did you use an outside consultant?
No, we didn't use an outside consultant at all.
Okay. Andy, I think you said that you did.
Yeah, so that was really critical for us, just as intensive of a process as it was. It was probably the first time that we had looked for consultants nationally. Normally, we were very focused locally, and we think that the expertise that we need for any partnership or endeavor is kind of local. But this was just really unique for us, and we felt like we wanted to talk to people who were doing really good community development all across the country. And so this was the first time we actually hired a couple consultants. Again, I think I said Baltimore, who just had a lot of history in community development and were grounded, and we felt like they were the best for us at the time.
Okay. Roger, have you ever used a consultant in all of your ventures?
No, each week our operations team has a weekly meeting, and anything that needs to be discussed about a partnership falls on that agenda, and we let our operations team work out those issues, and we have not used outside consultants.
Okay. So, kind of the other side of the, the positive of getting everybody on board and engagement. What was your biggest fear when you were going into whether to go into a partnership or whether to merge with an organization? Mary?
I think initially, well, there's a couple answers. First, I have 2 boards. That's my biggest fear every day. I don't recommend having 2 boards ever. But outside of that, it really was about whether or not, I think you can design something so beautiful in theory. And my biggest fear was that folks would just really outright reject the partnerships on the ground level, both staff and community. So my biggest fear was just how it was going to play out and how people would engage with it. I think that it's easy to think about it and plan it out, and it's a fun and engaging thing to do, but each day I'm always concerned about how people are actually engaging with it. It's easy to say you have a partnership. It's so much harder to actually do it.
Yeah.
Andy?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of fears, I think, just because we were looking at everything. I mean, in terms of merging boards and staff and financial systems and the different assets that belong to each organization. So, I mean, I think management kind of had an idea for where they thought things were going to go, but it really was kind of unpredictable because it was just, new territory for all of us. Everybody had their own perspective from resident focus groups, to the 2 boards and then the 2 sets of staff. There was definitely fear there in terms of what was the end product going to look like and who was going to be a part of it.
Thanks. Roger?
Ooh, fear. That's not a word I relate to because I'm so faith-driven. I know everything's going to work out. But from a practical standpoint, it was how will our team have the bandwidth to take on the training of these special needs students within the volunteer workday. But what happened, we had volunteers step up and owned the relationship, and we'll have volunteers that would come intentionally on Tuesdays and Fridays just to be part of that mentoring and guiding process to help these special needs students develop. It's been a beautiful partnership.
Great. As you can tell, Roger, I'm always positive about everything. So, great person to be around. So, Mary, you talked a little bit about having 2 boards and how fun that probably is to navigate. And then, Andy, you spoke a little bit about the unpredictability of things, but the concept of bringing 2 things together. And as we know, trying to fit a round peg into a square hole and merging in 2 different cultures, merging in, 2 different workflows of how things are going, 2 different staffing levels, the expectations of people. It is a difficult thing to navigate when we're merging things in together. So, Andy, could you talk a little bit about how you tried to maintain the culture or maybe build a new one, or, how you really were able to navigate bringing 2 things in to make them one? If you maybe designated a certain team or how you went about that task, because it can be quite difficult to make sure because of the uncertainty on where you may be going.
Yeah. And one of the most important things about, the process we went through was both organizations had some history. They might have been in the neighborhood for 15 years or so. So they were somewhat rooted in the neighborhood already. And so the boards also were pretty rooted, consisting of low-income residents and, volunteers and professionals. So there was a mix on each of the boards. And I think that was a real strength coming together because they recognized that the culture of both organizations was really important to maintain. So that really became, again, intentional in terms of maintaining culture or preserving culture, something that's going to create unity around our purpose. That was always at the top of our agendas. So we never lost sight of that. And that was really a good guiding point for us going through. There's a lot of challenging and difficult meetings.
Great. Mary?
Yeah, I think that what we've learned over time is that it definitely all comes down to paying a lot of attention to culture and expect it to be at least twice as much as what you're anticipating in terms of listening to people. So when we had brought together a unified executive director over 2 different nonprofits. It was really strange to manage 2 different staff cultures, and it wasn't a formal merger, so it wasn't exactly, you can't just unite everything. So I spent a lot of time listening to staff and just hearing out their ideas and learning the difference in the language that was used in both organizations. I remember distinctly a meeting where I was talking about innovation, and some staff members were like, I just really don't understand what you're saying with that word. Like, what are you wanting us to like invent something? And it was really just not part of the organization vocabulary. And so we had to really figure out those things that were different. And once I said, oh, I'm just looking for ideas on how to make things better. And they're like, okay, we'll just say that. So being patient with yourself as a leader and learning that you have to adjust and pivot to bring those cultures together, I think is one of the biggest learnings.
There's actually a very specific question for you that somebody has chatted in, and it centers around the type of partnership that you had, specifically on why you maintained 2 separate organizations, why it was decided that was a thing. Was it in 2 separate boards? Was it the fiscal responsibility of things? Was it just that it didn't make sense, 2 different types of organizations? I think we have some questions about why you went that path versus merging.
Oh, that's a brilliant question. So the very nuts and bolts of it is that we were in the process of a new market tax credit deal. And in order to make the deal work, we needed to have 2 separate 501c3s. And so we made the decision we explored a new partnership. So is there an organization that we could bring into this deal that would be a good fit? And we went down that road a little bit, and we had some real bumps in terms of mission alignment and the way we interact with community, and that was really important to us. And so we made the decision to break out the community-based portion of the work into a new 501c3. A lot of it was just general, let's just try it out and make this thing work. And a lot of it has just been figuring it out along the way. I will say, in hindsight, the beauty of it again is we could innovate in a way that we couldn't before. But the long-term plan is to bring them back together once we are out of compliance with new market tax credits. And that is the beautiful explanation of why I have 2 boards.
No, it makes sense. There's always a driving force for everything, and anybody that's not gone through a new market tax credit, there are a lot of rules and standards, and Andy, you can most likely speak to this as well. And it's difficult to navigate those rules and regulations, so makes total sense. We have another question regarding the culture, as this is always a very hot topic when bringing entities together. And oftentimes we see that, sometimes when there's a larger organization merging in with a smaller organization, that the larger organization culture will always be the one that prevails. And that doesn't have to be the case. So Andy, a little bit from you on how you navigated maybe piecing that together a little bit more. And is there anything that you had to maintain over the course of maybe a few years so that people could get adjusted to a new culture?
Yeah, I think, I guess it really comes down to leadership and leadership that really seeks kind of a transparent process, and maybe as Mary was saying earlier, about really being intentional about getting resident perspective and frontline staff perspective. I think that's critical to any, beginning of any kind of culture preservation, you might say. I think to make sure that those frontline staff and those residents feel like they're part of the process, and they're the ones who help build the culture, and if it's going to be preserved, I think they just have to be part of that process throughout. And I think leadership needs to be intentional about making that happen. A lot of times, I think due to time constraints and maybe budgetary issues, we don't put enough effort into that. But I think that's what I think that's what we spent a lot of time on, in probably the first year or so of the merger. And again, like I say, it's part of most board conversations today. I mean, we really take pride in the culture that we've developed, but it also needs to be nurtured every monthly meeting we have. So that's just that important to us.
You mentioned the year of the merger. So I'm interested to hear, when each of you came together for your partnerships, your mergers, or just your general partnerships, how long after that date, let's call it a specific date of when we came together as organizations, how long after that were you continuing these conversations with people for, anything and everything centered around the merger and what you were going on? Because I'm assuming it wasn't just a lot of conversations leading up to the day, and then we never spoke about it again, and then we were all, rainbows and unicorns at that date. But how long since the date of merger were you really still focusing on your partnership? Roger?
So within Boone County Schools, their culture would be teaching students character, responsibility, respect, integrity within the umbrella of service learning. And for us, with Christian values, are very much aligned with that. And we don't go beating them up with the Bible and our faith. We just want to show them compassion, kindness, love, gentleness, and patience. And volunteerism, is that not really just service learning? So our cultures come together quite naturally. We're just there to serve. And Master Provisions, we're just a bridge. We don't see color. We don't see disability. We love everybody. We want to help everybody. And so our cultures just meshed. Even though you have a public organization and a Christian organization, we're there to do the same exact thing. So I don't see a separation of church and state. I see all of us together to help our communities and to help people develop. So there really hasn't been any need for continued discussions about any culture clashes. We just have naturally merged together in our ability to meet the same goal, which is just serving people in need and developing people.
Mary, how the merger date, how are you working on culture and integration and everything that goes along with the two organizations?
So for the two organizations, it's just ongoing. It's a constant sort of part of the operations, how we connect. We have done a lot of things in terms of internal unity, but we have ongoing joint board connections, those sort of things. I think for other partnerships, it really depends on if it's a very specific, concrete partnership. So for example, with Over the Rhine Community Housing, our partnership is, it's pretty clear. We're partnering around developing 47 units of affordable housing. Whereas with Santa Maria, we're ongoing partners with things in the neighborhood, and those things shift all the time. And so we have to constantly reconnect and figure out how we pivot with it. So for us, it really depends on kind of the nature. If it's very clear, like we're doing this thing together, or if it's a much broader thing.
Okay. Andy, still working on it?
Oh, yeah, right. Still working on it. I think, as I'm thinking, probably 3 years was kind of after the merger that I think we all felt like, yeah, this was the right decision. There is we definitely can see a vision. We have a vision for this neighborhood. We see the future. I think I feel like 3 years was the kind of time frame it took for everyone to settle in, and including and we haven't really talked about this too much yet, but kind of funders. I think just it opened up a lot of avenues, new funders, strengthening, relationships with existing funders. And, I think most of us in the nonprofit world are really, are changing the language from funders to partners. I think most funders want to be partners, and they want to be part of that process early on. And I actually did, before the merger, and kind of contemplating whether a merger was the right decision, in addition to resident staff and board, I talked to several funders too, and said, hey, is this something that you see value in as a funder? Is this something you can get behind in principle and also behind in funding it? Yeah, I think that's also been really important.
So you mentioned funders. So obviously, once we're deciding to partner with somebody or we're deciding to merge, at some point that has to be communicated to not only our staff members, but outside agencies, the other partnerships that we have within the organization, and then obviously the general public. So interested to hear from each of you, at what point did you make the decision that you were going to start to communicate it? Where were you at kind of within each of your partnerships that you felt like that was the right time to communicate to the public? Roger?
Within the first year, we were able to very confidently tell the public about the benefits of the partnership with these special needs students. We had a really neat thing happen too, is that one of our board members, his daughter is actually a special needs student, and he gave us permission to publicize her story. And with tears in his eyes, he would say, she will come home on the day she's at Master Provisions and say, Daddy, I got to work at Master Provisions today. So it's been really quickly within the Boone County Schools partnership, we were able to tell those stories, and Victoria, our communications manager, does a great job of capturing those stories and getting them out there. And then Megan raises all the money to help support the programs.
Megan's on my screen right now. She's smiling.
Yep.
Mary, when did you go public?
So we went to a lot of our key funders early on with a personal outreach and kind of explain things to them. So for example, the process we're in right now with acquiring a small nonprofit that was formerly a partner, we've gone one-on-one to all of the funders and had that discussion. I think, it really speaks to the fact that folks want to be partners. Not all funders are going to operate the same way, but a lot of them want to be engaged in that early on. And so we were able to have those discussions. And I don't think I've ever had a discussion with a partner or with a funder about a partnership that wasn't positive. It's a very positive thing within the funding community. So they're usually exciting conversations to have.
Andy, how long did you wait on your communications?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like the funders were involved in the kind of pre-planning stage, which was really important. We ended up, as far as communication, pretty much, within a month of getting that merger certificate, we were definitely messaging in terms of this new organization. This is what our hopes and dreams are. So we kind of hit the ground running from there. Just one other thing, just in terms of funder, I'm thinking about another partnership I mentioned earlier when we partnered with Greater Cincinnati Behavioral Health Services on serving the chronic homeless. Something that we don't do a lot, but in that particular project, we got a pretty significant federal award to get started, and a large piece of that award was to hire an evaluator. It was like for 5 years, we hired a consultant who was going to evaluate the partnership and kind of the outcomes of that project. I was kind of nervous about having somebody kind of just looking over my shoulders for 5 years, but it actually was great. And she was great. And she did, not only just looked at kind of the strengths and weaknesses of the program, but met with residents and got their perspective on how they thought the partnership was going. So that's something I would really recommend. If it's a new partnership, ask the funder, hey, can you fund an evaluation piece to this to make sure that after whatever 1, 2, or 3 years that it's something we want to keep doing.
So that's an interesting topic as well as evaluation, and what I guess we would consider the next topic to be, the success. Did you spend a lot of time before you went into your partnerships determining maybe how you would define success? Maybe the parameters that you decided would be tracked along the way to determine your success, and how are you still tracking them? Let's talk a little bit about, just the successes and the what you've put in place. Mary? Sure.
So the first one that comes to mind is actually our partnership with Santa Maria. We work together on one program in particular, and we have shared outcomes. So we both put together a set of program outcomes, and we're each responsible for different pieces of it, but those outcomes collectively are presented to funders. So it's truly a collaborative buy-in. We don't meet our measures if we're not in it together. So that's been really successful. We each know which part of it's ours. and we come together regularly to see how we're trending. For Education Matters and Community Matters, I would say initially there was sort of a high level vision, but it took a while to get to a more strategic, measurable goals. And that was because they started to drift in terms of, they started to drift apart more, which is the reason for bringing on one executive director. And when I became the executive director of both, a big part of the goal was to have some unified scoreboard that we look at quarterly to see how we're trending. And that's made a big difference. So those are a couple of examples that come to mind.
Great. Roger, how did you determine and define success?
The subjective part of it, of life impact, the teachers and mentors from the schools would be able to share the cognitive growth that they've seen in their special needs students who were there with us from September through May. As far as our normal day-to-day operations of just food distribution, we measured that in metrics of the amount of food that went out to the community, which has increased 29% this year over last year, in part due to COVID. But doing annual surveys of all of our partners to understand where are their gaps in what we're doing. Are we really effective in helping them? And what could we do better? Just as well as site visits to evaluate how our partnerships are doing. We try to do all those things to measure how we're doing in all of our partnerships, even though Boone County Schools is the one we're mainly focusing on today. But that is a subjective measurement there, because we can see students coming out of their shell and being part of a group, but the professionals at the schools are able to share that these students, here is what they learned, and they are able to use that as an internal measurement, and they can directly trace that growth to what they experienced at Master Provisions.
Great. Andy, how did you define success?
Yeah, in terms of nuts and bolts, I think it was, can we generate more affordable housing units for the community? Can we stop doing so much deferred maintenance and actually get more repairs done? I think on the people side, can we raise the standard of living for our residents as a result? Can we pay a livable wage finally for our staff and get them good benefits? So that they'll feel, more respected, and, just overall, can we provide more holistic services to residents? So those were, certainly things that we wanted to result as from the merger.
So those are successes, which are obviously amazing to talk about and good topics. But, the other side of things, has anybody had to consider actually dissolving or unwinding a partnership? And hopefully not the one that you're in right now, or maybe you were able to overcome something that you were having difficulty with. But Mary, any thoughts on dissolving that you've had over the years?
Yeah, I'm going to divorce one of the boards. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so we actually had, I kind of mentioned it earlier, when we were deciding whether or not to create the two organizations, we had another strategic partnership. And we had been about 2 years into that partnership, and we're kind of ready to take the next big step of entering a new market tax credit deal together, which is a big deal. You're married for 7 years if you do that, so you got to be sure that this is what you want to do. And we had to do some evaluation in terms of our core, scaling everything back and just going back to our core values as an organization. And we noticed that there was just this conflict that we could not get past in terms of the approach to community. One approach was we are partners with our community and we're in this together. We're all part of this system together. And then the other approach was we're here to fix the community and we're the fixers and the helpers. And it really just boiled down to not being able to get to work cohesively long-term, because those two different approaches were just hitting all the time. We're just hitting heads. So we had to make the decision to dissolve that partnership before entering into the tax credit deal, which was a big deal. It was really challenging. There were tons of back and forth and ups and downs. And it was hard to do, and it took some time in doing, but long term, we knew it was the right decision. So sometimes dissolving is truly best for both parties.
Great. Thank you for sharing. I know that's probably difficult to have to share, but it's a difficult topic. So we've got about 5 minutes left before we're going to turn it back over to Jenny and to hear what everything that Leadership Council has going on to come forward. But the last topic I'd like to discuss, the last question is, what do you wish that you know now that you would have loved to have known before you started any of this? So Roger, what do you wish that you would have known?
Wow, I wish we could, how could we do this with more schools instead of just primarily Boone County schools? It's been so widely successful. That's the only thing I can think about. I think things have gone so well and it's been so successful. I couldn't even name something in relation to our Boone County school partnerships, but just being able to leverage that more and more so that we can even have a greater impact to help develop special needs people. That's my heart for our future. So that's a really hard one for me to answer.
Andy, what do you think you wish you would have known back then?
I didn't know Roger and I were going to lose all of our hair in this process. I think just thinking about where we are today, and I think a lot of these organizations that are on this call now are thinking about racial equity and kind of racial disparity. And I think we're thinking about that internally, but also I think we need to kind of use that lens on our partnerships to make sure that partnerships are addressing in some way that key key focus of racial justice and racial inequity. So I feel like we're at that point where we are starting to look at that with a lot of our partners.
So Mary, what do you think you wish you would have loved to have known back then as you were going into your partnerships?
I think I go back to making sure that the folks that are evaluating and helping to design the partnership are your team at all different levels. Most often it involves your folks that engage at that 30,000 foot view, and you leave out your ground level folks or your 10,000 foot view folks, and you're going to save yourself a lot of time in the end if when you're creating and designing and evaluating the partnership on the front end, if those folks are heavily involved. And I know as leaders, sometimes it's hard to brainstorm with somebody who's a ground level because they're thinking so practically, but that's where it's going to end up. So I think starting there would have saved us a lot of time.
So again, back to the concept of engagement, which is really what all nonprofits are about. So I want to turn it back over to Jenny, but I want to say thank you. Von Lehman is very happy to be a part of it. Right alongside of Leadership Council, but I want to thank you, Mary, Roger, and Andy for joining me today for a good conversation. Hopefully everybody learned at least a few things that can be of value to them. But with that, I'll throw it back over to Jenny.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks to, again, I'll echo the thank yous to Andy and Mary and Roger for sharing their experiences today, and both good and bad, and what they look forward to, and how they have helped to make the community stronger and their nonprofit stronger. So that's super to hear. Stephanie, thank you for moderating, and thank you to all those who were sharing questions and providing additional questions for our panel today. Again, I always think it's super to have some real life experiences from folks who've been down this road or have thought about it. And so keep these three in mind as you think about things. And as a follow-up to that, on September 17th, we also have a program. Katie, perhaps you can go to my events page. We have a program called, just scoot down a little bit, Beyond COVID-19 Partnerships and Sustainability. And that is a deeper dive into what we're talking about today. And our friends Marta Brockmeyer and Ann Maxfield will be leading that discussion and that workshop. There are a few spots left. That is not as large as this program is because of the deeper intensity of it. But we welcome anybody to register for that. We are requesting that to be CEOs or executive directors, and just to keep it to that close group. But there's a couple other things that we also have on board here. Feel free to check it out. We also sent out our newsletter today, so you'll get the same information about our programs and things like that. So, and if you aren't on our newsletter list or our email list, please let us know. We'll be happy to put you on. But a huge thank you to Stephanie and Von Lehman team today, Katie and Kyle for doing the behind the scenes work as well. And to all of you for joining us today on this great Inquiring Minds Want to Know program. So hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks.